Resuming debate, the honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is certainly one of the more important days in this House to be able to stand and speak about not only a subject which is extremely important, but one in which, because of cooperation on all sides of the House, we're able to have a serious and full debate without resorting to the extreme partisanship that sometimes takes place in this House. I'm pleased this afternoon to share my time with the member for Churchill. And during my time, I'd like to speak about, first of all, the importance of drug safety and the importance of regulations. Sometimes we have governments today and many people, many theoreticians in our society who talk about the value of deregulation, of just leaving everything up to the marketplace. But surely when it comes to things like public health and safety and something specific as drug safety, this is obviously a very key and important role for government. And in the case of thalidomide, we have a situation where clearly the government did not do its job. Clearly the government, for whatever reasons at the time, failed to protect the health and safety of Canadians. And thalidomide, the use of the drug thalidomide in Canada, I believe, has been rightly called one of the most serious drug catastrophes anywhere. I have met individuals who were affected by thalidomide, people who were charming, who were like normal people everywhere else, except they had very, very serious physical deformities. And these people, the people that I have met, were incredibly courageous, were incredibly dignified, because in spite of these incredible barriers that they faced, they tried to live lives as full as possible with as much dignity as possible. And so it is important that we have very strong regulatory regime to ensure that we have drug safety and that Canadians can count on their government, whether it is in the area of pharmaceuticals or whether it is for food safety, transportation safety, all areas where normally people would rely on their government to be looking out for their best interests. Now, in the case of thalidomide, we had a situation where a drug which was not permitted by other governments was in fact sold, was approved and sold in Canada, and it was a drug that was designed to reduce nausea in pregnant women, and women really rely on their doctors and on public safety laws to ensure their safety, especially during pregnancy. I know in my own pregnancies, you're hyper conscious of your safety. You're always concerned about what you're breathing, what you're eating, what you're drinking, to make sure that the safety of the fetus is protected. And in the case of thalidomide, unlike other governments, clearly the government of Canada failed. And I want to salute my colleague from Vancouver East for her work in the broad field of health, but also in working with the thalidomide survivors and for bringing forward this motion. And what the motion calls for is that the House provide full support to the survivors of thalidomide. The urgent need to defend the rights and dignity of those affected should be recognized, and the government should provide support to survivors in cooperation with the Thalidomide Survivors Task Force. And this is important, that the relationship be one of collaboration, of cooperation, of respect, and not of charity, because these individuals did nothing wrong. Their parents did nothing wrong. They believed in the government and the regulatory regime of the day, and sadly they were failed. Now, I've been contacted by many community members about this, all calling for the government to right this wrong and support the thalidomide survivors in Canada to ensure that not only the people affected are compensated, are supported, that they can get compensation now, but to ensure that such public health disaster never happens again. I had one letter that was particularly moving from a constituent who goes through an elaboration of the facts that we now know about thalidomide and its impact throughout the 1960s. But she was very personally affected by this public health catastrophe because her sister was one of the victims of thalidomide, and I was very moved by this constituent's letter. She wrote to me and to my provincial counterpart, and she talked about her sister, the very first thalidomide baby born in Canada, Kim Beeston, delivered in hospital in Toronto on January 20th, 1962. She was in the Globe and Mail. A photo was featured of her and her parents holding their bright-eyed, smiling girl. And for years, Kim was followed through the media. She became an avid swimmer, competed in wheelchair basketball, hitchhiked across Canada with her dog Sam. She was an activist pressing for wheelchair-adapted housing. But then she began to withdraw because her body began to fail her and she had chronic pain. Sadly, she passed away over a decade ago in a one-bedroom public housing unit in Toronto. She had a great deal of scarring across her body because of the impact of thalidomide, and she had almost non-existent legs, very deformed feet and toes. She was born with the damage of thalidomide, and its shadow trailed her to her death, so says her sister. Then the day after she died, her father took his life, and he left a note addressed to his daughter. He was apologizing to her, said her younger sister. He felt responsible that he couldn't be there 24/7 to care for her. Ultimately, he was blaming himself. This family story is a lesson about the forgotten fallout of thalidomide. The need to relieve the victim's suffering is evident. The tragedy of the Beeston family began when Kim's late mother swallowed a pill with her doctor's blessing. The ripples of that single act never stopped. So on behalf of Kim and her family, the sister is writing that it's time the Canadian government took responsibility for this horrific event in our history. The remaining thalidomide survivors deserve no less. So I would urge all members in this House to think not only of the Beeston family, to think of all of the thalidomide survivors. Let's ensure, first of all, that these survivors are compensated, they are supported, they are treated with respect, and that their needs are dealt with in terms of support, in terms of accommodation for the rest of their days. But let's also reaffirm to Canadians that we must never, ever, ever fall prey to ideological communications that somehow convince us that government doesn't matter, that everything should be deregulated and left up to the private sector alone, because that indeed was the origin of this tragedy. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude there, but just in concluding, I will thank colleagues on all sides of the House for this important debate today, and just urge all of us, urge the government to get this done quickly. Thank you.
Questions?